Welcome, everybody, to the next installment of our SpeakUp Talks podcast series. My name is Robert Greco. I'm the legal director here at SpeakUp, and I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Leanne Vallon, who is one of our customer success managers. Leanne, welcome, and we're very excited to have our conversation today. The topic is the art of speaking up. Maybe you can give a little bit more of an understanding of what that means in the context of your role as a customer success manager in speaking with many of our clients.
One of the things that we want to address today is the concept of psychological safety. And it's not a word that I use with my contact persons a lot, but we talk about structures, how to get to psychological safety. So what I do is I help our clients, their small clients, big clients, multinationals, to create a SpeakUp culture. SpeakUp, the software, is just one way to get there.
Psychological safety, it's a bit of a buzzword. What does it really mean in the broader HR, governance, people operations space? Is it also a critical compliance issue, or is it just more of a soft understanding of how culture should be built?
I think the hard thing with psychological safety that's really hard to grasp, and as a buzzword, like you say, like what does it really mean? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you cannot always measure what is psychological safety, but you can see where maybe it's not psychologically safe. And that could pop up in your SpeakUp software, your SpeakUp system, if there are maybe countries or teams that you never receive reports from, for instance. Psychological safety, to me, is also very personal. Mm-hmm. I think you can really sense it if you feel like, hey, I have an idea, or I have a concern, but I'm holding back. And what really resonated with me on the podcast I listened to again was naturally an organization is not psychologically safe.
What do you mean by that when you say naturally it's not psychologically safe? Is it because there need to be active steps in order to build, or is it because it's something that arises organically because of the people that you have in certain positions? I would almost think that there's always this baseline of general safety to share ideas, but you're suggesting perhaps that that's not the natural state.
And maybe also not on an organizational basis, but also maybe on teams or between colleagues or with your manager. There's all these things and structures that is really hard to complement what psychological safety is, but we know where it can go wrong. So when I do the onboardings with clients, I have a strict approach with certain pillars that I really want to walk through. Like, how does your SpeakUp culture look like? What do you have in place? How often do you do trainings? Who is involved? How is your feedback cycle? All these things.
And what are some of the things that the clients you interact with identify as being the challenging aspects of implementing those pillars or altering behaviors that are underpinning those pillars? Because I think it's always easy for us to say, these are 5 things that you need to do, or these are 5 things you need to pay attention to, but actually taking steps and ensuring that that is going to permeate through the different areas of the business, whether it's in the jurisdiction, in the group, if it's a large entity that has 40,000 employees with subsidiaries, if it's on a team basis, like where do your clients find the biggest challenges in trying to implement those pillars so that psychological safety is a byproduct?
Yeah, I talk to a lot of different organizations with a lot of different cultures, but also contact persons with different backgrounds. So when I talk to compliance officers, their background is and their focus is sometimes different than when I talk to integrity or ethics officers. Okay. So they have more of a training in psychological safety. I think it's important for everyone that's listening, from legal compliance officers or ethics officers or the people that I normally talk to, is that, well, there's stuff you can do yourself. Such super concrete thing as, how do I reply to anonymous reports? But also, like, what needs to be in scope for this to be successful in my organization? So what do I need from top management? How can my colleagues from HR help me with programs or employee surveys? Or how can marketing and communications help me with a campaign that helps to educate our maybe office workers or factory workers, people in other countries, other languages? And then in the end, our SpeakUp software helps to speak up in your native tongue, which makes it hopefully lower barrier for reporters to speak up. And it's also we always advise to position it as a last resort option.
Okay.
So it also means that you could see a trend where if we say in the speak up policy, go to the person involved if you feel like something is not okay, or go to HR or go to your manager, or speak up through speak up as last resort. These all give this ratio, how many people dare to go to the person involved or the HR person, or that gives a little bit of sense of like, where do I feel confident enough to speak up to? But also equally important is that these people are trained to listen. I think one of the things, and that it's something super important for leaders to recognize, is one of the jobs I worked for, we had a CFO, and once a week he would just sit in his office with his door open. And it was like this, it was sort of this Harvey Specter vibe person that you're like, oh my gosh, if he comes in the door, you're a little bit in awe. Okay. So, but he was really like, I'm so approachable. My door is open. I always sit there physically. No one comes in. So, hey, it's psychologically safe here. I make the effort. So it's, I think, also important for leaders to understand that maybe, no one speaks up, so it must be safe. That it's not always the case. There's so much more happening in an organization than that because of hierarchy.
Sometimes we think that we're creating an environment in which people will trust us, but in reality, we've only sort of taken a step or two. And I think about it in the context of humans in personal lives, building relationships with friends or with loved ones. And the more trust that you build over time, the easier it is for you to become vulnerable. And the idea to me in a space that is psychologically safe is that you have the ability to be vulnerable, understanding that you will not then be attacked. Yeah. That something you share will not be used against you in a negative fashion. Is that an angle from which you can build culture in an organic way, or is it something where you need to take active steps to use tools like Speak Up to have a situation in which people have the ability to report on issues in every language, potentially to be able to use AI tools in order to eliminate bias in how a report is analyzed, or in order to allow for quicker and more efficient dealing with issues so that people feel that they are being heard in due time, because there's almost nothing worse than saying, I have a problem today and it's solved in 6 months, if at all. So, do you think that it's trust? Do you think that it's a transparency issue? Is there such a thing as too much transparency? Like, I'm curious, like, how do you find a balance and where do you focus?
So when you say all these things, I think consistency is also super important. So also when you do go back to your friend, and like 10 times before, you could just share everything that's on your chest. And then the 11th time is like, and then you hear like, this person is gossiping about you. It's like done. We have a Dutch expression, like trust comes by foot and goes, on a horse, runs away. So that's, I think, the same with in an organization. Consistency about maybe how Speak Up officers reply. So if you go to country A, that of course you're dealing with different cultures and different situations, but that those Speak Up reports are dealt with in a way that's in line with the organization's values. So that's again why I talk a lot about with clients about the code of conduct. You need to know how you cooperate in the office environment, and where you can go if that doesn't, if it's not in line with the COC. And so officers should also be trained. If you get a report in, how should I reply? How can I just not only be the legal person who says like, well, it's in scope of the EU whistleblowing directive or not. It's about, and that's how our Speak Up software is designed, to create a dialogue. And from there, start to build relationship, build trust again, and find answers. Well, you've talked to Arun lately about AI, so AI could be a tooling that's not biased, doesn't have an ego, to help respond to certain requests or reports.
The use of AI in the tooling is an interesting one for me, because on the one hand, I think that it's almost as if when you leave a report, you do so without having to face another person. And when you're facing another person, it can always be challenging because you are exposed. So if there is an intermediary in the form of a human-like technology in an artificial intelligent voice agent, for example, does it help bridge that gap and build that trust because it is human-like but not actually human? And therefore there is, like you said, no ego, and there is no forced agenda that could be in that agent's coding. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. But I also question whether or not the sort of AI is then giving more transparency to a process or less transparency to a process. And I know that for me personally, I operate always best when there are very transparent processes, but sometimes that can also act to my disadvantage. So is there such a thing as being too transparent? Is there such a thing as having too much exposure when trying to build this safe, psychologically safe culture?
I think there can. And that's also why it's so important that you have trained SpeakUp officers that update the reporter about what they're doing, but not to the specifics, that maybe the accused person also has rights, and you need to take care of the person too, and not throw them under the bus. Right. Or you want to communicate as an organization, hey, this is what we've been doing. And also in organizations, there could be gossips, like maybe people are sent away for a certain amount of time, and how do you deal with that as an organization? So what do you say then? Mm-hmm. So it's both like, how much do you share with your reporter what you did with a certain issue, but also to the organization, to not say we did X, Y, Z specifically, but more like, we are hearing what you're all saying, and this is what we're doing next year, or this is what we're going to do with it. And then to openly, but confidentially, feed it back to the learning process of the organization.
I love that, we're not yet at a place, and I hope that we'll never get to a place in which the human element is completely removed, because I think that there are aspects of trust and transparency that can certainly be built with technology, but ultimately we always work best when we pair human with best-in-class technology. Mm-hmm. So if there was one final element that you would like for your SpeakUp officers or the clients that you deal with to think about when building trust, when finding the right balance of transparency, when considering which tools to use, what would you leave them with in order to help them build more psychological safety into the fabric of their organization culture?
So first, everything that we talked about, like in the profession as a SpeakUp officer, but also to keep it superhuman, because what we started with is, when you feel open, when you feel open enough to share ideas and concerns. And it's important that I think you train yourself on an individual level. How can you actively listen? I have this psychological safety playbook where there's super concrete questions, because the term is so abstract that some questions that you can include in your talks, there are techniques to actively listen.
I like the idea of the technique.
There are techniques to also speak up, because speaking up is not like snitching. It's not like not taking the responsibility of how you phrase your concern, who you share it with.
That's good advice.
And so that's so close to human psychology and how we function as human beings. So I would say, yes, everything in place, and then for yourself, dive into how can you be a more active listener? How can you be more empathic when you reply to reports? Discuss that also with other colleagues to have this learning path. Yeah,
I think that's wonderful. I am always fascinated to hear about how to build these interpersonal relationships in large and in small organizations, so that we can really push a conversation forward, so that we can build a space that makes sense for everybody to be interacting in, so that we can drive value for ourselves, we can drive value for our shareholders, and ultimately we can operate in a safe and ethical environment. So, Leanne, why is psychological safety important for businesses? Why is it something that they should be focusing on and not allowing to sort of fall by the wayside?
So the podcast that I refer to a couple of times in our conversation, it mentions a research done by Google researchers on their company in 2015. So I'm going to read it. The psychological safety is not only about a speak up culture, but it also has some benefits, like individuals on teams with higher psychological safety are less likely to leave. Well, in this regard, Google, they're more likely to harness the power of diverse ideas from their teammates. So they won't be locked in their individual brains, but shared openly. They bring in more revenue, and they're rated as effective twice as often by their executives. So.
Well, that's interesting, and especially coming from a company like Google, where sometimes we just anticipate, it must be a great place to work. Well, it actually seems that they're taking very specific steps to understand how to build it as a good place to work, how to maintain it as a good place to work, and then also creating and discovering metrics that feed back to help them understand why it continues to be a great place to work. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So something to remind the top over again and again if you don't get the buy-in from the top. This is why we're doing it. This is why it's important. It's money also.
I don't want to go so far as to suggest that the ends justify the means, but ultimately when the ends can be positive, then why not, put some effort behind building those means such that you do create a space that is psychologically safe for people to work. Everybody benefits, clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Jan, for joining me for the conversation. As always, fascinating to have this discussion. And thank you to everybody who has watched and listened to our chat today. Please follow us on social media so that you will have an understanding of what else is coming next. Many interesting topics of conversations and webinars that we're going to be hosting over the balance of the year. And we look forward to hosting you again in the near future. Thank you very much.